machine learning today and just all the different algorithms. So I want to focus, so AI Hub is really going to be an event company focused on bringing the challenges of AI to the public. And as I learn, I want to share that with everyone. And so have different types of programs and different types of events to bring on that. I'm mainly focus on privacy, I'll focus on ethics, and on security. So I'm going to have another event coming up on cybersecurity soon. And we're going to have a lot of resources on my website, AIHub.ai, so everyone wants to follow. I'm super grateful for all of you. It's really grateful for all the speakers to take time today to speak to us and so we can learn about privacy and the importance of it. And also big thanks to Galvanize and Chase for hosting us. Thank you.
Cheers. So I'll just say a few words about Galvanize before you guys kick off into programming. I'm Chase. I lead partnerships and event marketing here. When Anna approached us about doing this event, I realized how in line it was with what Galvanize is all about. So for those of you who don't know, Galvanize NYC is a 60,000 square foot technology campus. We're about the size of a city block, and we do three things here. We provide workspace to over 50 venture-backed startups. We are home to 3 Fortune 1000 enterprise companies in 1-800-Flowers, their engineering team, the Invesco Innovation Lab, and IBM's Cloud Garage. We also are home to 4 VC firms and who are collectively running 2 accelerator programs through our space, and that comprises the startup and entrepreneurship side of our community. But we also run immersive education programs in data science and software engineering. And we have an industry pioneer. We were actually the industry pioneers on the data science as an alternative education focus. So we're really excited to have you all here with your interest in AI. Join our community and start thinking through what the future of work will look like, as well as how we will live our lives. So, without further ado, I'll give it back to Anna.
Sorry, yes. So we're going to get started. Xena is going to be the moderator, and then I guess everyone can introduce themselves, and then afterwards we'll have Q&A, or what we want to participate.
Yeah, since it's a small group, we're going to make this somewhat interactive, but let me start with introductions. So I'm Xena Ugrinsky. I've spent the last 20 years of my life breaking technology because I was waiting for this moment to arrive. Okay, so last year I wrote a book on enterprise AI, Field Guide to the New Business Model. I spend my days advising C-suites on how to get it right the first time, as opposed to doing a lot of experimentation. I've been a partner at KPMG for a number of years. Booz also, I left Booz when I figured out that I really didn't care for government or cyber work. And I'm happily back in data science, applied data science. So, Reid?
Oh, I'm saying myself.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Reid Blackman. I'm a former philosophy professor. I was a professor at Colgate University for 10 years after getting my Ph.D. in philosophy at the University of Texas in Austin. I recently left academia and I founded Virtue, an ethics consultancy. So we focus on the ethical risks associated with emerging tech products, especially AI, VR, and AR.
I'm Shin. So I'm an entrepreneur, a data scientist, internationally organized in the space, like formal roles, think about everything from innovative technologies and patented technology myself, as well as on the statistics and data science side as well, on the academic research side. I also teach at NYU right now. I'm a professor, and I've done everything from being a product director to building AI to working at Nielsen and improving the methodology for how we calculate the universe. Before that, I was in finance and G capital and energy financial services and Caryle. So, why bring background? Which at the time people thought was weird. It turns out, data science came up, so it looks great now. So, sometimes people might think you're weird, but it's just right where you code.
Hi everyone, my name is Choudhury. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SAM.ai. What we do at SAM is essentially we leverage different branches of AI to have enterprise software talk to people at a more human level. So that's essentially what we do. So we're a CRM marketing automation platform, and essentially we talk to the system and we leverage that. Prior to SAM, I ran a company called USAweb, grew that from nothing at my mother's garage to a 44-person company, cannibalized that to start SAM.ai, and before USAweb, I worked for IBM for about 5 years.
All right. So let's get a sense for who you guys are in order to make this as focused on what you want to get out of it as possible. And let's start with the guy in the back.
My name is Paul Tang. I'm a partner at a law firm here in the city. I have a bachelor's in electrical engineering, a master's at NYU in computer science, and of course at JP.
My name is Joan. My last name is actually AI. So I discovered that when I was about 10 and figured one day I'd have some fun with it. And I actually have a portfolio of projects I work on through the World Economic Forum, an organization called EQ Institute, which is it's not very clean. It's not your IQ or EQ, but your digital intelligence quotient. And so we actually are putting forward a global agenda around digital intelligence and developing a framework. We've already developed a framework, but a global standardization around digital skills, literacy, and job readiness. So actually design, ethical, design ethics, and AI are all hot topic issues that we're all addressing through the forum.
Perfect.
My name is Bokut. I have a bachelor's in law and have a master's in intellectual property and technology. I'm interested in privacy, so I took the SAM exam, privacy questions. I'm really interested in AI, robotics, and digital forensics.
So I just want to make sure that I know your names. So say your first names again.
Paul?
Paul.
Joan?
Joan.
Bokut.
Paul. Joan. Got it. Thank you.
With you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ian Smith. I'm a business psychologist by background. So I work for a company called MindGym. I'm very interested generally in human decision-making, human rationality, in the areas of diversity and ethics, and in this regard, how it can translate into the algorithm capabilities.
My name is Seth. I'm an IT manager for an architecture firm. I deal with security and infrastructure and that kind of stuff. And we're required to comply with the GDPR because the national office, and so I'm kind of interested in privacy.
Beyond GDPR?
My name is Golda. I have a background in classified research, so privacy issues are big on my radar.
So I work at IBM in data and analytics. I'm interested in data privacy, AI, pretty much all of these topics.
Hi, my name is Ava Valdez. My background is engineer and data scientist. I work for Bell Labs for many years and then Verizon. And then I started my own company about 10 years ago, focusing on communication, more efficiency in the corporation.
I'm Edward. I was a philosophy major at NYU. And I'm working at a startup that is trying to decentralize the commerce system and restore trust and integrity to reviews and curation.
Hi, my name is Bruno from Brazil. I work with transportation there. I'm just taking some class in New York, spend a week here, and I like technology. I like this, so I hope you'll be here.
Great, welcome. Ken?
And Ken Kreitzer with CGSI Services in Westchester. We are a 45-year-old banking insurance firm focusing primarily on the credit card industry. And we're looking at AI applications for customer service and claims adjudication. And I also do some media work, so I try to get some Twitter reports out tonight.
Nice. And our late arrival?
Sorry.
No, can you just introduce yourself? It's okay, no demerits.
I'm disgusted by it. I know her. It's okay.
It's a little early and it's
I'm a sculpture conservator. I work with data in relation to preservation of art.
Okay. Great.
Eric. Eric Caryle, artist, also teacher of art and natural.
All right. Well, it's clear that, in this age of applications, desktop apps, mobile apps, consumers are increasingly just, they've never read the fine print, but now everyone's starting to become aware that there are ramifications to that. And simultaneously, businesses are trying to figure out how to monetize the data that they have, that they can get a hold of. There are entire industries that have now been built up where people are making money, buying and selling the information to one another. And in this age of increasing privacy awareness, we wanted to talk about, let's start with defining sort of for each of you what privacy means, right? Because we've got an interesting cross-section. We've got someone who's architecting a platform that's going to be using it. We have somebody who actively makes decisions about the use of data in media. We've got somebody who is very focused on the philosophical and regulatory ramifications. Yeah, okay. Well.
I more speak to businesses about how they can mitigate their risk associated with privacy infringements than I do to regulators.
That's right. And what I do is try to help them push the envelope so they're being risky, but not quite so risky.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so let's start with you, Rez. On the topic of privacy, I imagine there are a couple of dimensions that you approach it from. So perhaps you can talk about what privacy means to you and the different types of privacy that you think about.
Sure. So for us, privacy is something that should be guarded and respected by businesses, institutions, government institutions, etc. So that's sort of the philosophy, and I'm the founder of the company, and I essentially spearhead the product and the vision for the product. So we do, we're sort of a permissions-based platform where if you don't want to sync up your Google Calendar, it's completely up to you, right? From a leadership point of view, there's a level of sincerity for us as far as what data we gather. The other element of privacy, or what we define as private, is if someone has their job title as such on LinkedIn, that's not private data, right? That's available in the public domain. So we're able to grab that type of information or information that they provide. But yeah, anyone that sells data or does things where they're discreetly collecting tremendous amount of intelligence, especially on mobile devices and other type of hardware, to me, that does become a little bit, that's where we draw the line. We don't get into that. So yeah, I mean, privacy is coveted and it should always be held up to the highest standards. And from a software point of view, we consider public data that's available on Google, for example, and we consider private data that you enter that you want to keep to yourself and nobody else. So that's kind of our definition of privacy.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these questions about how technology and data is being used in privacy, these are not questions that were being asked when I started working with data 10 years ago. Of course, privacy existed, but privacy was more of a personal privacy of whether or not someone was stalking you, right? It wasn't an issue of whether or not your data was being sold, and those questions weren't something that now is what we're talking about, right? I think it's interesting because really privacy at the end of the day is really, it's about what laws are in place, right? It's how do we define it and what is the amount of protection that we can get and what is reasonable. So, I think that the missing piece for a lot of people out there when they think of privacy is that it's not just like we all know one definition and we know exactly what it is, right? When it comes down to it, a lot of the violations of privacy laws, right, are going to be hard to prove in court unless we have a unified understanding of what we all as a society consider to be private, right? For instance, it used to be that if someone took a picture of you, right, they couldn't necessarily share it without a waiver. However, now that social media being more prevalent, there's certain rules, right? So if you're in a public space, then it is allowable without the waiver. Things are changing even in that space, right? So I think from my perspective, from the business side, it's less of a personal, but also at the same time, really important because there are long-term applications that you do have to think about, right? But it really does come down to the definition, right? And where we, as a whole, we see society going, what we consider to be really unethical, right, or real violation. And I think the hard thing about it is a lot of times the business is ahead of the law, right? So you'll have businesses where you're being asked to make some of these decisions where it can seem very minor, but of course when you scale it out, it's much more major, right? When you start collecting data across so many different types of information, for instance, Like, I've had certain campaigns approach me and ask me to integrate multiple data sources to track certain people who are going to vote. Now, interesting data science project. However, I was not so, interested in going after that sort of work, partly because, well, I mean, the chance that they're actually going to leverage that, that's questionable, right? I don't know if they had enough technical knowledge to know how to really leverage it, but at the same time, if you build something and create something and put it out there, someone else might find it and be able to leverage it, right? So I think, for me, this is where I tend to be more selective, but sadly not everyone does, and I've seen a lot of less ethical decisions being made in industry, which I think is the thing that no one's talked about, but we do have to talk about, that are everyday decisions in business. When we say no to a project, we say we shouldn't be doing that, right? It may not be taken well, but there are bigger ramifications in the long run.
So I'll say two things. One, the way that I think about privacy, and the second, pushing back a little bit on what's been said. So the first thing is, the way that I think about privacy is in terms of what some people call informational self-determination, which is to say, it's up to you what sort of information about you is gathered and what people do with it. I get to control my information, or information about me, I get to control my data. So privacy, I think, at least when we're talking about ethics, has to do with informational self-determination, being able to exercise that ability. Now, let me connect that with some of the stuff that was just said. There could be some things that are in the public domain that are, well, acquirable, and acquirable legally. It doesn't follow from that, though, that it's ethically okay whatever you do with that information, right? So there could be ethical violations, there could be violations of people's informational self-determination, despite the fact that what's being done is legally compliant. So for instance, sure, your image is sort of out there in the public. If your picture is taken and you're in the public space, it's not illegal to have a picture of you, but suppose I start running facial recognition software, suppose I start running sentiment analysis, and I track that data, and I track you through the square, as it were, and I check out which stores you go into. Yeah, I'm out in the public, but the fact that you're collecting that information and then say some marketers for the purpose of target marketing, that's probably legally compliant, I think. I'm not a lawyer, but even if it is, it's certainly ethically problematic. And one reason that really matters, of course, is that consumers are getting increasingly savvy to the things that people, or the things that businesses are doing with their data. And once they get really savvy from things like Cambridge Analytica, there could be a genuine backlash. So not only is it ethically problematic when that kind of so-called public data is collected, distributed, shared, sold, but there's also a business case for making sure that things don't go that way.
So in my customer base, I've served clients across pretty much every industry there is. And what happened is about 5 years ago, as GDPR was just beginning to become a topic, I was able to divide my client base very clearly into the ones who were saying, this is awesome, we're going to do whatever we need to do, and we need to figure out how to get around GDPR. And then the other half, with better chief risk officers, we're starting to think about, well, while the CFO or the COO might say, it doesn't really matter to us, we're a US company. The reality was when they started pulling it apart, they realized they did have customers who were either buying in Europe and that they would then be beholden to these laws. So there are, the conscientious organizations have been thinking about this for some time and thinking about, specifically GDPR, how to be compliant, and also what is the future of how that's going to roll up here. So with that, so we know that in the course of commerce and the trading of all of this data, our rights are being infringed upon. Whether we can prove it, whether there are standards by which to measure it, I think that's not quite mature yet. But what should we be doing as in our respective roles to be proactive about either privacy by design, for example, Roz? What are you guys doing about it today?
Vast amount of energy technically for us as far as pertains to AI goes into understanding human language, right? So we don't necessarily violate any privacy laws or any ethics related to privacy. So for us, leveraging a piece of technology or a group of algorithms to understand certain things, like for example, who are some of my best customers in my database, instead of having to type that in or to click or generate a fancy report, you just talk to the system. Understanding human language is sort of where all the energy that we have as a company goes into. So we're very proud of that, and the reason why we're proud of that is because, well, you know, when I was in high school, I did a paper on Westinghouse and it was on AI, and at that time, AI was all about robotics and how AI could actually interact with humans at a more human level. Now, AI has become all about sentiment analysis and things, you know, finding patterns, which is really not AI. Finding patterns really doesn't have much to do with AI. You could use so many different algorithms. I think the general essence of AI is really to be able to understand and relate to human behavior, right? And for SAM.ai, our energy goes into NLP, right? Which doesn't necessarily violate.
Does everybody know what NLP is? Natural
language processing, which essentially allows a machine to understand what you're saying in human terms, and then convert that into, for us, convert that into commands so that you don't have to do 10 hours of report generation and things like that. So to that extent, we feel like we're doing the right thing with AI and leveraging technology. But yeah, I mean, look, there are so many tech companies out there. I remember getting pitched by a tech company that said that, hey, look, if you use our platform, your team, as they use the internet as a whole, will collect data, and next time you guys have lunch, the platform could essentially pick out what you're going to eat on that given day, right? And that, to me, was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. Because essentially, it's not asking the team members to provide their preference, whether they like Thai food or Japanese or whatever. It's essentially scouring through their metadata as they browse through different channels, and then automatically suggesting, yeah, John, Mary, and Jane, you don't have to bother asking what they want, this is what you should get it. And so, first, I didn't understand the business model. Like, how can you possibly have a big enough market for something like that? And B, like, who in their right mind? If I'm the CEO or if I'm the head of my team, why would I allow a platform to collect all this data so that I can mine that data to pretty much order Chinese or whatever I want to order? You know what I mean? So there are companies that are taking it to the extreme where they're essentially saying, well, so long as we have your discretion to go through your emails and read what you like, that's legit. We'll just use that to save you time so that you don't have to worry about asking them what they want for lunch.
Yeah, I remember when that was doing the Gmail, right? Gmail was very controversial in the beginning of that. The fact that they would actually go through your email and yeah, it's right. So no one seems to remember that anymore because it's so big, but that, these privacy issues were there with Google when they, were up in space. Also search engine, right? They're collecting all that data on you. And that's where it gets a little bit murky, right? Because there's information that they're getting that is potentially very important for society, right? An example of this is when people are looking up symptoms of a disease, right? That's a faster way for the government to get information about what diseases might be happening to their population than people reporting to CDC because of the time lag. Now, of course, what they're reporting is accurate. That's a different story, right? But in terms of where the data is, if you can find a way to do that, right? Find a way to figure out what the noise is from which symptoms are maybe severe enough, right? Or which are the ones that are, already being considered as a potential epidemic. This is where it becomes, potentially very, very valuable for society to have information. Now, I think what's really interesting in this space is a lot of times I find that it's because people don't understand what they want to do with data that makes them kind of resort to collecting all the data they can, thinking that somehow if I hold everything, then I'll just have it there. So when they go back, I didn't miss anything. Which is ironic also because they never go back to actually look at it. And I think for me, where I see the real danger is when companies do that and then don't protect it, right? So they collected it for this reason of I want to have it just in case I need it, which is fine, we all understand that. However, if you then don't go and safeguard it or invest in the same amount of security as you did in the algorithm, right? Say you spent $10 on security and $2,000, right, on building algorithm. Right? This is a really very disproportionate amount of money being spent there. And I find that that's often what will happen is that they'll have bare minimum maybe security, and not really put the same investment in certain aspects of building AI technology. So I think that's really, I think with awareness, one of the things I try to really do is teach and get more awareness out there so that people understand the differences. People need data science and AI, right? So if AI worked properly and you had a great algorithm, then you wouldn't need insights because they would just go on each person's machine and run and automatically get that information for that person and be able to recommend something great. It really wouldn't matter what the population had, right? It would be based on your preferences instead. But it doesn't do that now because people are kind of boosting the system in a sense of getting the information from consumers to build out models and then serving it back to the consumer. It's not actually based on that one person, it's actually a lot of times based on the population, right? So if you can build better AI or do better data science at one extreme or the other, in theory you may not need to have this real overlap where there's this tendency to kind of want everything and not necessarily do everything to protect information.
So the question, if I get it right, is what are we supposed to do to help companies protect our privacy?
So, yes. So either in their case, what are you doing today? How are you thinking about it? And in your case, how are you advising people on what they should be doing?
Yeah, so here's why consumers are getting pissed off. Companies are taking advantage of their ignorance. That's it. I mean, they're taking advantage of their ignorance. Consumers don't know what they're collecting. They don't even know what the word data means. Most consumers don't know what the word data means. They have no idea. And ask them what metadata is, and they never heard the word, let alone have any idea what it is. Let alone know if they know what it is, what can be inferred from their metadata. They don't know. And so that's what allows companies to rip all the data and then do their analytics and their target marketing and all that. Okay. So if they want to treat customers with respect, which is good financial reason to do, aside from ethical reason, of course, on that system, but there's good ROI on treating your customers with respect. You win their loyalty. Same with your employees. There's good reason to treat them with respect. It earns employee retention and attraction. And don't ask me, ask Deloitte. Millennials really care about that stuff. And they're the fastest growing sector of consumers and employees. So there's a damn good reason to treat them with respect. Now, how do you do that? Well, you don't take advantage of their ignorance. So what do? You educate them. So you say, look, you're about to use our stuff. We want to let you know this is how we operate. But how we do that makes a difference, right? So if you just shove a banner on there with here are our terms and conditions of the privacy policy, go get a JD and read the thing, that's not genuine education. That's I don't know what that is.
What that is.
Right, yeah. It's like plausible deniability, although I think it's relatively, any consumer would call it implausible deniability. So you can find, it is safe harbor, but it's not going to stop when the consumer's like, I didn't agree to this, and then the business says, what do you mean? You clicked I accept. The consumer's going to say, I don't give a shit. I didn't know what the hell that was. You know I wasn't going to read it. So you didn't actually give me that information in good faith that I would actually process that information. So what I tell my clients is just tell them to the extent that you can, that's compatible at least with your bottom line. You should be able to tell your consumers what you're doing and why. And if you can, short term, you're going to gain a lot, probably. You're going to gain, but long term, you're not going to. Long term, you're going to get stung by social media and the others.
So actually, that segues right into the next question, which is convenient. I think consumers are getting smarter, and the media is helping them get smarter. There's beginning to be noise around, the consumer uprising. If you're going to use my data, what am I getting for it? And by the way, the app no longer has value because everyone's used to saying, yes, install this, right? So what are you doing with my data? How are you profiting? And, what am I getting out of it? So do you see a consumer uprising coming in terms of awareness?
It really depends. I think as jobs get displaced pretty rapidly in the next 5-10 years with automation, with AI, with a whole bunch of other globalization elements, people will start wondering, well, who is monetizing all of this and why is my job being replaced? And then they'll realize, well, my job got replaced by a bot or a system which essentially collects data and analyzes it. That means you have my personal data, whether it's from a credit card transaction or from an Uber ride or whatever it is. So I think they'll connect the dots very soon. It hasn't hit home just yet because I think, the human nature is such that we learn through harsh experiences, or we don't wake up until we go through harsh experience. So I think there will be a time, and maybe it's not tomorrow, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years from now. And I think, we kind of talked about this in our call. You have trendsetters. You have the European Union that's setting the trend, maybe the state of California that's setting the trend. And I think, New York is a classic example of how we are considered a leader in clean technology when it comes to transportation. Other cities, when they're looking for funding or when they're looking for anyone back there, it's like, well, the city of New York is doing it, why can't we do it? So I think, sooner than later, at a state level, states are going to wake up and say, look, my constituents don't want to be spammed every other day, or I have way too many people out in Florida that are concerned about how their medical details may be shared at a meta level, which kind of bypasses our clients, right? And so I think that will happen, but it will be gradual. I don't think it will be overnight. I think what needs to happen possibly is at the university level, those that are making these decisions today, whether they're data scientists, entrepreneurs, and others, they need to take courses in ethics. They need to take courses in consequences. So for example, on those that are collecting that data, they also now have a huge responsibility in protecting that data. If they don't, they now have to answer to the investors as well as those that may cause damage too. So there's a certain amount of liability on the data that you collect, right? So I think those that are teaching data science courses or essentially producing a new breed of entrepreneurs, they ought to be aware of the level of risk they're taking in hosting that data, collecting it, and not only that, deciphering it and using it at a pace where they may not even be aware of the consequences. So a hack is a classic example. We worry about that every second, right? Oh my God, we have all of the sales data of all of our clients, right? Because we're CRM platform. Now we cater to mid-sized organizations, but we recently had a government agency interested in using our platform, and we kind of said, no, we're not really interested in hosting your data because you have pretty much a branch of military or former head of, they have all these colonels and all these other people that they want to enter into this database so that they can cater to them better. This is a list of maybe former military officials, and we didn't feel comfortable hosting that data because what if we had a Russian hacker interested in that data where they live?
Not only that, it puts, I think, undue stress on your operating model
It
because
does.
now you have to move into a FISMA high compliance
That's right.
situation.
There's a term for it. There's a new compliance guidelines for anyone that's catering to the federal government, and I forgot the name of it, but yeah. So there's that process, like $80,000 to go through the whole process. So for us, it's a balance of, is hosting this data even worth it, right? And if it is, how can we encrypt this even if there's a collateral damage? There's no real damage. So I don't know. I hope I answered your question.
I think for me, one of the disconnects I really find is that everyone thinks it's easy as just make a course in university and teach people. Except what they'll do is they'll get PhDs who never actually work in the real world, have no understanding of the actual risk and ramifications, or even how do you convince a business that it's the right thing to do, right? That's a really an experience-based skill that you can't read from a book or just tell someone how to do. Will most definitely get retaliated against. You go to your job and just go, hey, I think you should do this. This is a bad decision. You are never going to work here, right? This is just how it goes, right? And most people who work know this. I think there's a big disconnect about what, even just I think the perception of what everyone thinks universities are there to do or what they're doing. I don't know if you guys have read about that new scandal that came out, right? With Lucy Huffman and Lori Loughlin, okay? Right? Like, so, you gotta really think about, a lot of that is even happening and not happen because people just buy that if you have the brand name school, that automatically must be that person's smart. Maybe not, right? We can't just turn off our brains and not think about these things. And as soon as we do that, I think that's kind of problematic. And even at universities, unfortunately, that is something that I think, kind of always gets dismissed because I find that a lot of times in interviews, people will say, well, the younger generation, they know so much, they know everything. And I go, no, they really don't. I teach them all the time. They are used to using it. They're used to, if you use the same template they saw in 4 other applications, fine, because they practiced it enough that they can do it again. You give them something new, they can't tell you how to build it. They can't, I've worked with them in startups now, and I can tell you, they underestimate the cost, they underestimate how quickly you can scale, they underestimate the human factor. That you cannot scale out people in the way that you want, and no, you can't just think of some job and then hire someone because you thought of a job. That is not how that works. The amount of business you lose because that person doesn't exist, huge, right? And also you just can't sell data to anyone and think they can make money. That's not the nice thing, right? There's a real gap, I think, in terms of what people think they know and the reality of what you do know and what you can only gain from experience and from talking to people who have experience to share, right? For me, on my end, a lot of times when I get asked to speak, I do feel compelled to go and speak because a lot of times when I have people come into the team, they don't ever think about these real world aspects, right? Which the universities are not teaching. And the other side of that also is that, from a technical perspective, right, when I look at my students' work, I mean, it's interesting because we're giving away the degrees a little easier these days from what I've seen, right? But just because, universities want to make money, it's not a good reason for why they should be telling them they're better at technology than they are. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because that it's almost inevitable that there will be a data breach, right? It's almost inevitable that there's going to be a hack or break. It's a very risky thing to tell students that they are better at building technology than they are. Because the fact of the matter is, yes, you can make an app. That's not the same thing as an enterprise level system. There's a huge difference, and yet everyone treats it like it's all the same. It's not. It's really not, right? You have to really, think about that. For instance, most startups will tell you, when we consider ourselves a real business, because now we have to care about security. Corporations start with caring about security, right? Even internally, who gets access to data, right? Who can do what? Who can we track? We want a team, because if someone, say, stole the company's data, you want to know who stole it, right? So security is on the forefront if you're a corporate.
Entrepreneurs, right? And the reason being is essentially Uber drivers, the process standpoint, and you have all sorts of other industries that are becoming much more entrepreneurial, right? People don't stay at hotels as much because they're essentially on different platforms, vacation rentals and other platforms where they can rent stuff. So there's something to be said of that job displacement because now, unlike machines with ATM, now you're looking at a lot of data collection, data processing, and I do agree that enterprises are still shy about leveraging AI fully, but it's an iterative process, right? So you give it another 5 years, right? They'll start feeling confident, and then the millennial person that just joined the company will now have a VP role, and they'll start making really interesting calls. So.
Just like sorry, by the way, it's like I work with a lot of millennials. And what's interesting is so I will say one thing. There's a difference between what's being marketed as what companies are doing and what maybe they're actually doing. That's the first thing.
Yes.
How it's being marketed is not necessarily what's being done, right? From what I've seen, very few people know how to do AI at a scale that you wish. I have not met many people because here's the thing: you wrote a great algorithm. Okay, great. Was it feasible? Are you actually going to have a margin wide enough that you're going to make money off of it, or did you just come up with an algorithm that's fast? I'm great, that's fast, but if computationally it's going to cost me more money to run the algorithm, I'm not going to implement it, right? The reality is, how well is everyone actually doing AI? I've not been impressed yet. I really haven't. People are going back, researchers are going back to models that have been around for a while. Now, consumers and general industry, right, maybe have not seen it. But for those of us who did research, this is same old, same old. We know exactly the classic models. Some of the stuff doesn't really change. Now, right now, one of the reasons why things are changing is because if you're, say, a statistician, you have more data, right? And we didn't have data as readily available before. When I was cleaning data, 5 years ago, it was a lot more work than now. By the way, it's not that it's less work because it's automated. It's less work because I can get more technology, for cheaper, and really the cost part of it. I'm still definitely maxing out my computer, I don't know, 13 gigabytes. That thing is already just eking, right? There's not enough space out there, or RAM out there that's going to meet my expectations, frankly. So yes, we have more of it, but then there are always more questions we can answer. And the reality is, with AI, there is no technical definition of AI. It's something that people seem to miss. You can go Wikipedia, there is no technical definition for AI. So then you have to think, what are we even worried about or scared of? What is it that we're so concerned about? And most of the decisions that are going to happen right now, from an ethics standpoint, a person decided to use AI for that. It is a person who decided it. It's not that machine suddenly did something, right? It's that someone said, hey, I want to use that algorithm to take advantage of that situation, right? Because I see an opportunity. So at the end of the day, as it stands, like, companies, and I've seen a lot of this where they'll invest a lot of money in an AI initiative and then they'll just kind of get rid of everyone on the team. They'll eliminate entire teams. That's where I've seen the biggest impact of number generation in terms of jobs. I see a lot of, like the whole like ping pong table thing starting to get old now because, it's just there's no job security for young people. And I see it all the time. They can't stay at a job long enough. A lot of times the budget gets cut. Now that is something outside of their control because it's someone higher up. When you have someone who's higher up and more experienced and promised a bunch of stuff and they deliver, they cut the whole team, right? So I think these are like the real sort of impacts that I'm seeing more immediately with things like AI. In hyping it up, there's also this other backlash that will happen if people are not careful about, thinking about more than just 2 years down the line and think about what happens if it doesn't work, right? Or say like for instance, a lot of companies will say they do AI, but they outsource it to Microsoft, right? They use an API. They didn't build their AI, they leverage an AI service. That is not the same thing, right? Because at that point, you're using the same model that every single Microsoft customer uses, right? Not the same thing as building the model, right? So there are these differences that are very, very important, I think, in really understanding like why we're not at risk of this sort of thing happening. However, if you give people the power to let AI do certain things, then yes, we're all at risk because chances are that logic is flawed, and it's the flaw in the logic that's going to be the problem.
I want to go back to the workforce thing for a moment. In early 2016, Russell Stevenson, who was at the time the CEO of AT&T, was literally the first CEO that I saw put a stake in the ground and say, we are going to allocate $8,000 a year per employee for technical training with two requirements. One is it's got to have something to do with their job, and two, they have to do it on their own time, right? But that was the first time I saw a CEO put a price tag on how to reskill the workforce. With the, there was also the acknowledgement that an entire segment of the workforce was going to be like, you know what, I'm a lineman for the county. I am never going to learn any technology beyond what I know today. And they'll get exited, right? Whether it's a happy exit or a not so happy exit. That is going to be the collateral damage. But providing employees a path to being a part of the future is something I see most boards and C-level groups really spending a lot of time and increasingly thinking about it.
I was just going to say that a lot of these companies are, irrespective of the CEO's vision or their sincerity to keep that company intact. There's a lot of pressure from the investors, right, to increase the bottom line and make a huge impact on the bottom line. So I've seen visionary CEOs just cave to the investors' demand, right, and the investors essentially want the best return on investment. So the point I was trying to make about AI and job displacement is that it is pretty real because now we're not looking at financial jobs, we're looking at complex jobs, the things that, I was at Goldman Sachs when I was an IP consultant, and there were at least 2 floors of derivative managers, right? You don't need that many derivative managers more because you could actually build an application that could go to that data set and lightning speed and have it get there. So when we talk about displacement, I think the concern is real, and I would agree with you that we don't know how fast that might happen, right? But that's why there's a topic of, well, basic pay. Let's now talk about basic pay. Let's not wait another 5 years. No, it's not a socialistic agenda. We're not trying to do that as well. We're essentially worried about what might happen in the next 5 to 10 years because there's so many companies that are essentially reporting to their investors, irrespective of how sincere the CEO is, and they report to the investors like, well, if we need to cut costs and increase the bottom line, let's do it. And if we could borrow IBM's AI or somebody else's AI, then let's do it so that we can, So unfortunately, in a capitalistic society, CEOs are temporary and they are being held accountable every quarter. And I now have a board and I'm held accountable. And some of my visions that are with me as far as data privacy and all of that will essentially hold true because I have a majority shares. But I'm just thinking, 5 years, 10 years down the road, when my shares are like my
minuscule, I don't know how much of a say I would have. And you look at some of the visionaries in the tech world, right? Apple is no longer run by the founder, and neither is Google or Microsoft. It's run by board control CEOs. So there is that element that could change the dynamics of how founders or real CEOs care about the employees in the team, but the reality is over a course of time, what dictates what happens in corporate America is obviously the bottom line, right? So job displacement, when that happens, people will start paying more attention to data privacy. Because what they'll realize is that the only reason why they're displaced is because all this data that's in the process. So they'll have this animosity with AI. No one hates AI today because they're dealing with Siri and Google Assist, right? But the second they realize that it took their job, they'll do this stuff.
I think that's right. But so we'd like to open it up for some Q&A for you guys. I mean, certainly we have the luxury with a group this small of answering any questions you might have. So the floor is yours. And honestly, Anna, I don't think we
need a microphone. If anyone wants to.
Unless anyone wants to.
Is there an informal, or I'm assuming most likely not, Hippocratic oath equivalent to Ethical Design?
No. Should be taught, that's what I was trying to say. It doesn't exist right now.
So it's like, if there are any that you're aware of that in terms of the community that's in Silicon Valley or
there are a few things.
Google is a good example, do no evil, like having an evil.
I think about Tristan Harris and Center for Community Technology. But is there anything beyond that, like that you're aware of?
There are a few things. There's like ethical operating system, ethical OS. They have basically a checklist for going through, hey, does your product meet these ethical requirements? There's IEEE, Ethically Aligned Design Initiative. There's, and I'm a member of the Ethics of Research and Design of AI. So they have some recommendations, some candidate recommendations, but nothing, frankly, very great. And then there's the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Alliance. They have a draft ethical guidelines out right now. Those are okay. But there's definitely nothing that's universally accepted. And there's nothing out there, in the public domain anyway, that's, in my view, particularly good.
I've had some people I know in the space, like from data science, try to, roll something like that out, which I thought was, I don't know, I had a hard time believing that anyone who worked in a corporate environment would be so, okay with, taking on these general ideas. But again, like, the huge gap between the idea of I'm not going to do anything wrong and like doing that thing that's kind of on the fringe and could have a bigger implication, but it's such a huge gap, right? I think the tricky thing is, it's a nice idea, but you have to think about fields that have Hippocratic oath. There is an actual disbarring that can happen. Like, you can't practice medicine afterwards, right? We don't have that with data right now. There is no, you can never touch data again. Same thing with the law association, right? For the bar, you have to, actually accept it as bar practice law. You can't just practice law. Again, you can get this bar, right? And what does that mean? That means your peers have determined that, you're no longer fit to be, say, a lawyer, right, sports law. But I think without that other element of it, where you have a review process with people who are in your field, right, willing to kind of look at that, and also some sort of ramification for not following it. I think it's a nice idea to have that we'll all say of course we're all going to say we're ethical, but it's very hard to have it be something that anyone's going to be responsible to.
Part of the problem is that it's most of AI ethics is academics talking to academics and it's academics talking to regulators. And it's not ethicists, particularly academic ethicists, talking to businesses. And so you're not going to get any uptake from them because they're asking their own question, like, should we do this, not given that we're going to do this, how should we do it? Or let's regulate. But no business is going to be like, yeah,
no one wants to jump on it.
Let's regulate it. Let's regulate us, right? So most of the ethics stuff you see out there isn't actually talking to businesses.
I think
not in the way that they'll listen.
I think at a consumer level, when data monetization is at a consumer level, that's when I think we'll have a self-regulating economy, right? So if let's say you allow your credit card company to mine your data, and for every piece of data that they mine, you're given 3% back, right? Hey, then you have some control of the situation. But it's like LEED certified building.
certification process the buildings go through to be clean buildings is optional. It's not mandated, but the government will incentivize it if you get on these certifications. So now they're more LEED certified buildings. So let's say one of these organizations do get somehow backed by, you know, the state of New York, for example, and says, well, if your software company is certified XYZ, certified, ethics certified, we're going to give you, you know, some tax abatement for 10 years. You know, so it's a combination of governments as well as others to take initiative. But I think ultimately what would have to happen is consumers demanding that they monetize their data, and that will change the whole thing rapidly.
And there are companies who are working on this, who are figuring out how to tag data in such a way that the data that people sort of put out there is identifiable in some way through the system such that they get paid, like, say, a pharmaceutical company.
So I just want to go back to the point about the practice of law. It's actually, yes, regulated by the government. Practice of medicine, same thing. Practice of accounting, same thing. And perhaps what was necessary is that the government regulate the practice of information technology. Before you mentioned it's like a pure regulates, sort of, but not really. It's really the government stepping in. They established this thing called the bar, and in some ways the bar is governed by a peer group. And I just wonder if a lot of good points that are being brought here could be raised by this type of licensing of information technology.
I'll tell you what's really hard about that, though. Even in the space of like data science. The data science maybe 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, we didn't use the term. Let's take 7 years ago, 5 years ago. That encapsulated what now we call a branch out data engineering, right? That was all, like I did data engineering and data science, and like product and AI, all of these things. And then over time, the last few years, it kind of turned into different roles, right? It's because technology touches all the fields, right? It touches everything. And then even within, from a technical standpoint, you have a product, right? You also have the actual engineering underneath it. Then there's something called integration, where you incorporate other companies' technology. It's very difficult, I think, to have one domain. It's hard because it's not just one domain where you can say an expert is someone who knows this one thing, right? A lot of times I see people who get jobs in technology at a higher level of management who never actually built it, but know about it, right? And so they might be considered qualified, but to an engineering team, they're not qualified. So it becomes a lot more difficult because based on who's focusing, like if it's an engineer versus a product person versus a business person, the idea of qualifications even for determining who should be making that decision is very difficult to kind of come to consensus about.
Yeah, so I mean, the same rules of practice of law apply to partners and law firms, as well as associates, as well as government officials who happen to be lawyers. So I'm not trying to say that you're going to establish how a piece of code is going to be written, but if there is a bound that can be established above which, if you exceed it, you've kind of gone beyond bounds, then you should be possibly have your license taken away. That might be the type of thing.
So there's something called PCI compliance. So if you're an e-commerce site, you have to be PCI compliant, and that's government regulated. And the reason why that's been enforced is because a lot of people lost money because e-commerce sites that weren't secure, they had their credit card, and they had their client's credit card stolen, and there was damage. So in the court of law, what happens with data privacy, like what we're talking about, is that let's say someone hacked into a database, and now they know where you live, and they know what you buy. Let's say you go to the supermarket, you buy certain type of products. It's hard to show damage on something like that versus an e-commerce database where it has your credit card, right? So the government has stepped in to an extent where e-commerce websites have to be PCI compliant, has to have SSL and all of those things. But when we're talking about data at a personal level where, if you walked into a retail shop and now they know the pattern that that your buying pattern or cyclical pattern, whatever it is,
loyalty tax,
a whole bunch of stuff. You can't show damage. So at a court of law, you can't really get the government to say, yeah, you know what, that's really evil, that's bad, that causes harm or financial loss and all of those things. So it's one of those things where, well, okay, big deal. Now, HIPAA compliance is different because now you're looking at health data, but some of the other stuff, like buying behavior, site visiting behavior, things like that, it's hard to
it hasn't happened just yet where the government said, yep, this is a citizen level concern. I mean, Europeans have taken different stance, but in the US.
So for example, I practice law in New York. I have this identification associated with my license to practice law. Let's say I do something unethical. It will be known throughout the state of New York, Paul Tango, this identification number has breached the laws of ethics, the rules of ethics. So I won't be able to practice law. Probably all the organizations that entrust your matters to a lawyer probably would not entrust it to you. So having said that, so why couldn't there be?
I think in due time it will happen. We're
Yeah.
just at its infancy. You got it. So, you know.
I agree with, like, I would love to have me describe, like, I mentioned about that tonight, I think, like, you know, having so that we can actually say, yeah, that person's really bad at doing this, we should maybe not let them. That'd be great. I think where it starts to get a little bit trickier is that a lot of the people who build the newer models and the newer things are scientists, right? They're people who work in science. Now, how do you regulate something like that and then not get in the way of development in science? And I think that's where it does get a little bit more tricky. Because while, you know, there's certain rules that you follow with science, you're always trying to find the new thing, right? You're not sticking to rules of just what you do, but like trying to find a newer way of doing it. And so it's always, the point of it's almost always to kind of come up with something, which of course the rules aren't going to exist for. And so I think, again, that becomes, I think this is where it gets tricky, because if you were to limit, say, algorithms or like some of the other, and now, of course, there are certain cases with things like genetics where that should definitely be regulated, but again, that's more concrete. Whereas when we develop the technology to do that thing with the genetics, right? If you had stopped people from even, you know, exploring that, it's hard to say what's a reasonable bound for how much science you can do, and you know, because we don't know what we're going to come up with yet. And I think that is from a, you know, democracy standpoint, right? It's a tough thing to be able to regulate and not, and know for really sure that like you're not infringing on, you know, say intellectual freedom.
So hang on, I want to, so we can come back to you. I just want to make sure that we get our colleague from IBM to ask her question.
Yeah, I guess my question, I guess on one hand, I see in organizations that are corporations, you know, there's opportunity, which often, as you say, has to do with cost savings or, you know, gaining in revenue. It's something more money-oriented, where I can implement AI, it saves me process time and money. And then on the other hand, you have privacy, where I see that almost as, at this point, fear of punishment. You know, there's punitive stuff that's coming about. And as a result of GDPR and some of these data privacy rulings, which are starting to grow, you know, they have an EU implemented GDPR, and then these global companies have to implement it everywhere, and maybe it will come to the US, although we tend to be more free market oriented. But basically, what I see is this, you know, sort of amorphous blob of the corporation that has been collecting data for years and years, and they have data everywhere that they aren't even sure, you know, where it's being used necessarily or what's happening with it. There's a fear of data breach, you know. But within all of this now, what I see is within organizations almost a panic setting in of suddenly we have to take this data and control it at the highest level and investigate and control and make sure, you know, when we're executing contracts, you know, there are legal groups dealing with all of the data privacy now within companies. So I'm working on something now where, you know, we're trying to sign contracts with Google, and they're so siloed, and you're trying to figure out, you know, to get a straight answer could take months from these corporations. Like the reality of it is you don't get straight answers. There's no person that's, you know, head of this company like a brain that's really helping you navigate all of this. And then we're told you can't put any private data in any of our systems. And it's like, okay, that's nice. How do we screen for all of that? So I see this as evolving into new states where what, you know, really is needed, and it's interesting, are better ways of managing this data. You know, how do you find private data? You know, like for example, if I have location data that identifies a person, and a dynamic IP that identifies a person, how do I go into systems and find all of this? It's contextual, it's, you know, so I see that as kind of another step, but again, it's almost based on, you know, this. And so I guess that's really my question is, how would you
recommend, sort of improving or enhancing upon the management of privacy or tools to find the data and ways of moving forward with that.
Okay. I'll take the corporate perspective first, right? So as the digital era became a conversation and there was an urgency around the digitalization of assets, data management started bubbling up as an area of focus, specific focus. And I think what we're starting to see is that it's now becoming a broader conversation between, the Chief Information Security Officer, who is now the one who's, responsible if there's a breach, right? The Chief Risk Officer, who's trying to figure out how to quantify what that risk is and include it in their enterprise risk calculation on an ongoing basis, as well as sort of the topic of cloud, right? If I'm going to put my, you mentioned it too, right? If I'm going to do cloud and I have a government entity that I serve, that cloud has to now be FISMA high compliant, which increases costs, but it also forces me to start thinking about, do I know where all of our data is? And the answer is usually no.
Exactly. No idea.
Okay, so I mean, it's coming together. It's more of a collective ownership now by those various functions, as opposed to just give it to the CIO and they'll inventory the data, and then we're good.
Yeah, for mid-sized companies, it's usually the CTO that has his or her job at stake if something happens with the data. But I think larger organizations, the risk officer as well as the CIO, because
and CISO.
Yeah, because well, for financial services companies, they have a certain amount of compliance that they have to oblige to based on regulatory bodies, right? Or they can manage their content really well. There's something like it depends on how big the industry is, right? So for financial services, there's something called reg tag, right? So regulation tech is a breed of software companies that just come up with software so that they can manage regulations. So for data risk management, there isn't anything because it varies industry per industry. So I think we're at our very infancy, but I think over a course of time, yeah.
I think the other thing is, keep in mind, we're talking about data and privacy. So I just read an article like this week about how a police officer decided to use a sensitive information database in Florida to go hit on women. And it took them years to figure out that he was doing this. And there was they managed to find at least 150 women he contacted.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we're not talking a little bit. It's been like years and years he's done this. And there was one person who tried to do this with, and her parents found it suspicious and reported it, and then they did an investigation and found that there were lots of women they contacted. Now, again, like this, we're talking even something as simple as that, right? There is this privacy element, right? And the people, right, is where that's going to be dangerous. Another example would be, say, someone actually decided, all the companies claim your data is not being sold, it's all private. I think someone actually did pay money to see if they can get their own tracking information, on your phones, because your phone and it has Bluetooth ability, right? Then you can ping and basically people track you. And so even though the major telephone company says, oh, we don't do that, we don't give that data out. Turns out if you went through a startup and then another company, you could get that person, they got their own information back. But they shouldn't have been able to get their own information back, right? And did it with multiple companies in fact, right? So I think that this is, where that education just across people in general, just everyone being more aware of